So it's been announced that teachers in England and Wales are set to go on strike in February and March after members of the National Education Union voted in favour of action in a dispute over pay. So teachers in England and Wales will be joining their Scottish counterparts on the picket lines, despite Downing Street urging teachers not to strike, which they said would inflict substantial damage to children's education. Well, joining me in the studio now is GBNews political reporter Olivia Utley. Olivia, so they have all decided that they will strike. Was it 1 in 10 were against it? 9 in 10 were for it.
Yes, and last week or a couple of weeks ago there was a similar vote and it failed to reach the 50% threshold because the turnout was so low, but the numbers were pretty similar. So this is extremely bad news for parents and children across the UK. We know how damaging remote learning was for children during the pandemic, and the threat is that that's what's going to come back. Now, head teachers have said that they'll take all reasonable steps to keep schools open for as many pupils as possible over the striking days, and has said that any individual school will only be affected by 4 of the 7 days of strikes. But any reasonable steps is pretty vague. And the bottom line is that the government has no leverage to push teachers into going into school if they don't want to. So essentially what the government is going to do, it seems, is sort of plead with teachers to keep schools open to teach at least GCSE and A-level pupils in the lead up to their exams. Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, is going to meet union leaders later this week. But again, just like with the nurses, it's hard to see how there can be a breakthrough when the disparity between what they want to be paid and what they are being paid is just so big.
So what is it that they're actually asking for now? What percentage is there? Do we know how much?
They want more than 10% pay rise. Right. They were offered a 5% pay rise last year, but they were given a 5% pay rise last year, I should say, sorry. But they say that amounts to a pay cut, as inflation is around 10%. So they're asking for a more than 10% pay cut. Figure's not yet clear.
Where are the government with their sort of strike limitation bill? They're trying to sort of get people to at least give a minimum level of service.
Well, it's moved forwards a little bit. It was tabled last week, but the expectation is that it won't, if it is to get anywhere, and there's a big question mark over that because we know that there'll be plenty of MPs, the whole of Labour and quite a few Conservatives, who won't support it, and then it faces problems in the Lords and in the courts as well. But even if it were to get through, we could only start to see that coming in the summer, which is far too late for these strikes, obviously. So maybe that's the long-term solution for the government, but even then, the minimum service legislation would only apply to certain sectors, and it's thought that it would only apply to sectors where lives were at risk, which this probably wouldn't fall under.
So, so how many days are they saying they're going to strike then? And is it all schools? Because it's head teachers and it's also teachers. Is it across the board now? Will there be some schools that people won't strike in?
It's 7 days of strikes. As they say, individual schools are only expected to be affected by 4 of those 7 days. There are 300,000 teachers in this union, so I don't know how they're distributed across schools, but it sounds as though almost every school will be affected.
So there'll be no level of minimum service, and basically, are they saying that they might do remote learning, or is it just that people will actually have to take their kids and... Because that's what the public will be wondering. I mean, I've got a 13-year-old in school, 14-year-old actually, in school, and a 5-year-old. Am I going to have to stay at home and look after them?
Well, the conversation last week was that it would be a return to remote learning, but it's not quite clear whether that would be provided. Again, head teachers have said that they would put reasonable measures in place to ensure that schools are kept open for many pupils as much as possible over these days. But without any sort of minimum service legislation in place, as you say, it's basically at the whim of individual teachers, and the government can plead if it wants to, but it might not get anywhere with that. I mean, that said, Gillian Keegan is meeting the teachers' union this week to discuss it. It's possible that there will be some sort of breakthrough. We know that, well, it sounds very much as though we're heading for a breakthrough on rail strikes. And on the nurses as well, it looks as though the government is going to capitulate, at least in some areas. So it is possible that these strikes end up not going ahead. But with that disparity between a 5% pay rise and the inflation plus pay rise, which teachers are asking for, I can't quite see how that gap could be closed.